Hello everyone and welcome to Pisa Presents. Today we're looking into the world of pestilent elements, heavy metals, notorious ores, and poisonous minerals with toxic. But first, a quick note. The following is not an instruction manual on what minerals to stop collecting. For the love of God, if anything, get more minerals and then get some fossils. And you know what? Take some pictures and send them to the Facebook page because we really like that stuff. Instead, what this is a primer on how geochemistry can and does impact us all, even in potentially unexpected ways. Please keep in mind, though, that because the following contains descriptions of poisons and their effects, just use your best judgment as to how much of this any potential little rock hounds in your immediate region should be seeing. So, first of all, some basics. Here, obviously, is the periodic table of the elements. So, what is an element? An element is a material whose atoms cannot be broken down further chemically. So, take our guest right here, atomic number 82. Now, you cannot break down lead any further, only into individual lead atoms. And then we have a compound, which is a substance containing two or more elements. You contrast that to a mineral, which is a naturally occurring solid with a definite composition that is composed of elements and/or compounds. And a little quick safety notice, for the love of anything good and holy, do not lick your specimens, please, just ever. If you're trying to identify something, please know if it is hazardous to you before you stick it in your mouth. Just don't go around licking specimens, and some of the following are very good examples of that. Now, that's about as good of a segue as I'll ever get for patent medicines, which is something that will come up in the following. So now, what is a patent medicine? Well, that's something that reached its heyday during the Victorian period. They're substances, note the implied air quotes, that touted a very specific but untested medical effectiveness. Now, oftentimes, these were anything from, say, pills to tonics, what have you, that were laced with addictive or even poisonous substances. Now, that created a problem that's still ongoing, where many of the following found their way into people's households and even into people's own bodies. There also, too, was a time when it was thought that a lot of these substances coming up, I'll mention a few when I get to them, that people knew fully well that these things were poisonous, but still, all the same, there is an idea that, well, if I take a different dose, or if I take it in this way, then perhaps it'll actually be beneficial. We now know that that is actually very much false, but still, all the same, just keep in mind that when you hear about people somehow taking some of these substances, it's not necessarily perhaps because they were stupid. It's just, in some cases, folks just didn't know better. Now, as Paracelsus once said, all things are poison, and nothing is without poison. The dosage alone makes it so that a thing is not a poison, which is a very, very good entranceway for arguably the most infamous poison in history, which is arsenic. So arsenic is an element, it's on the periodic table, and it is commonly found in several ores. An ore being a naturally occurring solid through which a valuable material can be extracted. So some of these ores are as following. Arsenic is also found, by the way, in groundwater as a byproduct of mining or smelting through other various processes as well. Here you have arsenopyrite. Here you have Yrite. This right here, this is Hutchinsonite. This one is a wee bit interesting. So a common impurity is antimony. So just consider that formula for a second, and yes, one mineral can have arsenic, lead, tellurium, and antimony. Yummy. Next we have my favorite two arsenic ores. I love these with almost an unreasonable passion. I just think they're awesome. We have orpiment first, and then also realgar right here. Now, in some sources, you may see arsenic defined as a heavy metal. That's not necessarily true. Traditionally, a heavy metal is an element with a high atomic density, number, or weight. A lot of things that are classified as heavy metals are toxic. But the problem is that the term hasn't really been fully standardized. So it's something that kind of gets bandied around a lot in, say, like TikTok and literature and other sources where people don't always necessarily check their sources. And just so that you know, as arsenic is properly what is classified as a metalloid, basically something that's like a metal chemically, their classification is very indeed debatable within heavy metals itself. But still, all the same, when you go by the name the King of Poisons, you are not something to sniff at. Now, yeah, arsenic has been known throughout history as being very, very infamous. Here we have the Borgias. You may have recognized the name from the Assassin's Creed games, the best ones, the Ezio series, woohoo, or the thankfully short-lived show. Now, without going into the details, because the Borgias are an absolute historical dumpster fire, they were a family that achieved great success in the Italian Renaissance in part due to their ruthlessness, including a not too judicious use of arsenic, which is why that guy on the right there is looking very hesitant, like, I don't really think I'm going to take that wine, thank you, Cesare, but still all the same. Arsenic was officially discovered in 1250, but that's one of those things that it was in use for centuries, and for some odd reason it's only being credited as being discovered in 1250, but no, it was actually discovered very, very earlier. It's just we're not really sure how or when. Now, part of the dominance of arsenic as a poison is that for quite a long time, it was very easy to hide as food poisoning. Just to use as an example, I'm a great fan of Dame Agatha Christie. She used it 8 times in her novels and short stories. While arsenic is used in limited and not encouraged, I'd like to point out, benign applications, it's mistaken for food poisoning was why people used it for so long. Nowadays, it's very, very easy to detect and also, fortunately, to treat in certain stages. Now, however, resulting arsenical poisoning, you can get cancer, heart disease, neuralgia, and skin lesions. So still, all the same, it's nothing to mess around with. Much like our next follower here, which is asbestos. Asbestos is not one mineral, but actually a group of 6 minerals. The word asbestos loosely translates to the unquenchable, which is a reference to their well-known fireproofing ability. Now, altogether, probably the most dangerous form of asbestos is known as blue asbestos. It's chrysotolite right here. Now, asbestos was really used a lot by the ancient Greeks. They started to kind of get into things heavy about 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. Pretty much were very, very big fans of it. Absolutely love this stuff. Wrote what's basically fan fiction to it even that scholars have been able to find. It was called amiantus, which is a term that means undefiled. It's another reference to it's basically being unburnable, at least in their eyes. But it's used in a lot of other things, just not things that were fireproofing. Everything from, of course, various clothing, hats, gloves. The Greeks used it a lot in various shows where they would make like special outfits and curtains for people, and then the person would be lit in fire and just stagger around like you're at Burning Man or something, and just look, I'm not dying. It was even used back in the day in book bindings, because when books were very, very precious, people didn't want to lose them. So yes, asbestos was used in book bindings. Also, paint, various plumbing components and water pipes, and to various mechanical components it's been used in. But everything comes to an end, and thankfully the end for asbestos really started to kind of fade out around the year 1918, which was when the first academic serious reports came out going, guys, we really need to keep an eye on this here. And then later on, things started to progress, most notably in the 1970s. But still, up to then, asbestos was called by several groups the service to humanity because it was considered a wonder mineral. It formed very fine fibers, which made it easy to work with. And in terms of blue asbestos, mining of it was once prominent in Australia, Bolivia, and South Africa. The problem being, of course, that exposure to dust or particles containing these fibers can cause asbestosis, cancer, mesothelioma, and silicosis. And the thing that's absolutely frightening is that you can be exposed and not show any symptoms for 20 to 30 years, which is just absolutely staggering how insidious this is. Now, this absolute beauty right here, does anyone recognize this? Well, this is chalcanthite. It's a copper mineral noted for its staggeringly brilliant blue color. I mean, that's lovely. Seriously, look at those. They're gorgeous. Now, problem being, it's known for something else, meaning, well, its ease to assimilate into the human body tissue and cause massive copper poisoning. So, in a lot of places, you'll see the clickbaity articles on poisonous minerals like top 10, top 11, whatever. And some of the frequent inclusions on these I found rather interesting. So, like Paracelsus said, does the dose make the poison? So the following three, we're going to look into some of those three frequent inclusions, and we're going to see and just go back and forth a little bit as to whether or not they really belong on some of these lists. So first up is fluorite. Yes, that fluorite. There can be only one. It's like Highlander, you know? Now, a concern with fluorite is the emission of poisonous fluorine gas, which, yes, indeed, is not something to sneeze at. And it can, in some cases, also contain radon. But you know what? Keep your fluorite. It's fine. It emits the gas only when heated or reacting with acid, and even then, only under certain conditions. Which, honestly, really, I mean, you do what you want, but you shouldn't be lighting your specimens on fire and doing some of that stuff anyway. It's just not safe. Now, this one is a bit more substantial. While pyrite is still perfectly safe to have in your collection, just don't get it wet as it famously tarnishes very easy. Pyrite in the presence of a closed environment with moisture and heat can actually produce sulfuric acid. Its formula right down there is FeS2, so that's where the sulfur comes from. And in turn, pyrite becomes a leading cause of acid mine drainage. So that one I will give you under a pinch, but I will absolutely not give you quartz. Yes, quartz. Nothing wrong with it, it's flipping quartz. The alleged problem with this is that in crushing it and breathing in the silica dust. But here's the thing, folks. 26% of Earth's crust by weight is made of silica. Most rocks are 45 actually, to 70% silica. There is simply too much silica in the entire world to point to quartz as a big bad. That's basically like, I don't know, like you go make yourself a coffee or something and then you burn yourself in the cup and you blame the cup. Well, that's kind of what it's supposed to be doing. Now, next we have one that isn't known of too much, but still Arionite. Now, this one is absolutely beautiful, as you can see, but still, it's listed by the World Health Organization as a, and I quote, highly toxic human carcinogen. Why is that? Well, it's a naturally fibrous, what's called a zeolite mineral. We're going to have another PISA presents on that later this year. It gives it the ability to cause a situation much like asbestos. It's very fibrous, with mesothelioma and silicosis resulting from this as well. Now, our next one is a little bit entertaining. It is actually pronounced jadarite, just so that you know. But first of all, if nobody has heard of this, here's a big clue right here. And right off the bat, tell me he doesn't look like Tim Curry in Rocky Horror. So let's get you some background as to why this is here, because you're probably wondering, like, why the bleep am I looking at Superman? Okay, now, so the guy on the left, first of all, is proof that occasionally mankind can do something really, really boss. That, folks, right there is Jerry Siegel. That is one of the co-creators of Superman. So he actually created kryptonite in 1940. He wrote about it first. It was going to be included in one of the Superman comics, but then DC actually squelched the story and hid it because they didn't want Superman to appear vulnerable. But only 3 years later, they had a radio serial. Now, for those that are listening in the audience that may be younger, back in the day before we had TV, people would listen to basically plays, like think of TV shows, on the radio, and there was a very famous Superman one. So in 1943, there was this serial that was called The Meteor from Krypton, which dealt with this mineral that was created from the planet's destruction. And in 1949, it became comic canon with different colors having different properties. It was actually Siegel's idea specifically to end it in ITE because he wanted it to have sort of the scientific backing of like other minerals. He wanted it to sound appropriate. Now, so why does this fit? Well, because kryptonite is, according to Superman Returns, in an absolute blink if you miss it scene, sodium, lithium, boron, silicate, hydroxide with fluorine. Now, you take away the fluorine and you have jadarite. When it was found, researchers were not allowed to name it kryptonite. Time Warner was not too happy about that, and so were the people that are in charge of approving mineral names. It was named jadarite after the site of its discovery. Problem being, it's also living up to the kryptonite part of its legacy as well, because at first people were thinking that it would be this great ore that would be mined in the area, but then certain concerns are popping up through issues with the local groundwater and people picking up things, and now they're looking at it and going, boron? Lithium? Yeah, this might not be the safest thing for us to be mining. And because of the concerns over the toxicity of the key two elements, that is what has drastically slowed down its mining. Now, this is something that I noticed on Mindat, which, if you don't know, is the biggest mineral website that there is. So you can see the lower sentence that's right there. I'm not going to say anything. All I can say is, yeah, that's well done, Mindat. Every so often, you guys just sneak in something totally cool, and I really appreciate that. So thank you. Now, next we have lead. Pretty much everybody has heard of lead. The major ore of lead, it's an element by the way, is galena, which is on the right there. Now, galena is lead sulfide. This is also cerussite. It's known as white lead. It's very amazing to me because it can take so many different colors and it looks so staggeringly beautiful, but it's like some of these other minerals that we went through earlier where just this intense blue color just hides massive amounts of toxic amounts of copper. Now, galena has been the primary ore of lead since about 3000 BCE. It was named by one of the people probably, this guy probably makes more appearances in this channel than anybody, so Pliny the Elder. Come on out, buddy, take a bow. Oop, there he goes. Now, the Romans were very, very big on using lead. They called it plumum. It was, however, discovered first, or at least used first, in Anatolia, which is in modern-day Turkey, in about 6500 to 7000 BCE. That number's a bit up to debate, but the Romans calling it plumbum was actually opened it up to part of its really big legacy, because that's where we get our word plumbing from. And as advanced as they were, one thing Romans had become known for as lead pipes. No, actually, not that kind. Mr. Green had it anyway in the movie, and so I will absolutely stand by that. It's this kind. These folks are actual Roman-era lead water pipes. Its use included a whole ton of things as well, but as for many things that lead's being used for, there's also quite a few myths concerning it. And yep, a rather big one is that the Romans didn't know what they were doing with it and that they didn't know it was toxic. No, Romans knew the entire time it was toxic. Not only that, here's one of the main writers from the period, Vitruvius. This was written during the reign of Augustus, the first emperor. You might also have known of him as Octavian Caesar, but this basically, okay, so let's just get some quotes directly to him. said to be injurious to the human system. He even says that water conducted through earthen pipes is more wholesome than that through lead. So not only is it poisonous, but it makes your water taste funky. Now, they knew what they were doing. This was what the Roman Empire looked like right before things started to crumble. And oftentimes, drinking water from lead pipes is one of the touted reasons for why the Roman Empire fell. But seriously, folks, look at that. You cannot possibly keep something that big across several continents going for a very long time. It's just simply too difficult. It would be too difficult today with the use of airplanes and Wi-Fi and everything. Let alone, too, there were a lot of myths purported about lead, and some of these came about really in a 1983 book without naming any names. This person inflated the everyday use of lead, just really how often it was used, and also it ignored certain instances of adulteration of food and drink with lead. Lead's often been, even in Prohibition, it was used as a adulterant in, say, alcohol because it lent a naturally sweet taste. So if you were trying to hide that this alcohol wasn't necessarily alcohol, people would dump in a crap ton of lead to it. Again, something that I definitely don't recommend. But these things happen in certain specific instances, which this author kind of sort of ignored and took things out of context. That's not the only instance of lead being sort of mistaken for doing something that it didn't. Like, famously, allegedly, Queen Elizabeth I used lead as a cosmetic, which, yes, lead was used as a cosmetic back in the day, but she is purported to have basically just absolutely caked it on her and lived in this stuff. But all those reports about her using lead in that way, she used it to cover up smallpox scars and to keep looking young for a very long time. It actually came about several generations after she died. So if she was very well known for it, don't you kind of think that some of these records would have popped out during her lifetime? Now, one thing about lead in water and just lead poisoning is that the water needs to be freshly distilled and soft and heated, and the pipes need to be new for these effects to go on. Just regular, the way that the Romans had their water pipes, well, yes, you would get lead into there, you wouldn't really get that much as what you would think. And also keep in mind that many other cultures used lead without a similar catastrophic result. So, yes, the memes are wrong. Sorry, everybody. The Roman Empire did not fall due to lead. It was something a whole lot more complex than that. Something that it probably did cause was actually what happened to the Franklin expedition in 1848. So when these people went out to go exploring, they went into the ships, the Erebus and the Terror, and they had water distillery systems in the bottom of each ship that were made of, you guessed it, lead pipes. So everything's hot, it's freshly distilled water, and then also too, the contract to get the cans for their food was done at like the 11th hour, and these cans are just absolutely coated in gobs of lead from not only just the soldering, but from really messily making these cans. And we know now from a lot of the symptoms that these people had, sadly, and the records that they left behind, most serious researchers point to the fall of the Franklin expedition being due to a massive case of actually group-wide lead poisoning. Now, this lovely thing right here is not something that you would want to take aside anyway. This is actually the major ore of mercury. It's known as cinnabar. So mercury is also an element, and it's known as quicksilver. It has a very big role in human history, even going back to the times of the alchemists, where they thought it was really awesome that it could take this liquid form. What isn't awesome about mercury is that mercury vapors are one of the most toxic things on the planet. Now, so here is cinnabar, and also too, it was used for ornaments, pigments, eating utensils. A lot of different cultures considered it a status symbol to have instruments made out of cinnabar. So people that were lower on a socioeconomic status, or even say the enslaved or convicts, what have you, people were forced to do this mining. And yes, the toxicity was still acknowledged in classical times. Different civilizations, like, say, Spain, the classical world, China, Egypt, a lot of these civilizations left us records of them knowing, yeah, that's, we shouldn't be touching that too much. So let's just pay that guy over there to do it instead. And sadly, because a lot of these people didn't have any options, they did it. And with some of these cultures, considering just laboring in a mercury mine such a death sentence, when people were given the order, a lot of times their loved ones actually gave them a wake. According to some, the mineral name cinnabar comes from the Persian for dragon's blood, but that's not really very well proven yet. Another ore of mercury is coloradoite. And an example of what you should not do with mercury can be found in the California gold rush, which mercury can be used in processing gold ore. And back then, there was 10 to 13 million pounds of it dumped into the water, which is something that they're still having issues with right now. So mercury poisoning can take many, many forms. Irritability, headaches, to even, sadly, death. Now, the most characteristic, or should I say the most stereotypical thing that comes up when people think of mercury poisoning is what's called Mad Hatter's disease, or also the Hatter's shakes. But to be more respectful about that, let's call it by its proper name, which is erethism. So when people would make hats in the old-fashioned times, you would what was be calling felting the material, the fabric. It had to be softened around a form, and that softening involved great deals of mercury vapor, which, yes, they're inhaling the mercury vapor straight away. That is just absolute, that's terrifying what these people dealt with. Caused massive, massive neurologic trauma, affected their nervous systems, their memory, coordination, balance, lots of different things. So to really call them mad, implying that they're insane, is kind of bypassing really that this was their job. And again, this may have been something that they didn't really have enough money to leave. So something else that we can look into here is phenacite. Now, this one is also known as phenakite, and it is a mineral containing a great deal of beryllium, which is never a good thing if you're wanting to be very careful. Also, too, some radioactive minerals. Now, a lot of these, like hydroxyapatite, have radioactive minerals often as impurities. But also, too, you can have, when your nickname is the mineral from, I can't say this word because this is YouTube. It's uranium, folks. That's never a good thing. Yeah, torbernite, beautiful color, not good. Uraninite, also known as pitchblende, it's probably the biggest ore of uranium. A lot of these minerals also, too, were sources of radium as well, which kind of comes along with uranium. And so you can have either acute radiation syndrome, which is basically, think of Chernobyl, big, massive instance of radiation release, or you can have chronic radiation syndrome. And the most famous case of that is actually a relatively local one to the Northeast, and it's one that's very, very significant to not only American, but actually global history, and it's one of those events that people have only really taken that much notice of recently, thanks to a staggeringly great book. Now, so Connecticut, Illinois, and New Jersey, some wonderful women were exposed to various radioactive materials, most notably radium, specifically being told that it was safe. They often did this to paint and enhance various patent products and other things, like, say, dials for watches and for airplanes. They became known as the radium girls when they started just dying en masse and suffering from radiation poisoning. Radium was also used in patent medicines at the time, much like a lot of these other ones, from arsenic, lead. Pretty much a lot of these were used in patent medicines. And down on the lower right there is one of these radium girls, Catherine Donahue, God rest her. she's on the list of people that when my time comes, I'm going to go find her because she's absolutely awesome. Now, just to kind of not make light of things, but just to help the mood improve a little bit, here's a quote from Marie Curie. So a journalist once asked her, "How is it to be married to a genius?" And she goes, "I don't know. Ask my husband." Now, finally, we have stibnite, which is absolutely lovely, but an ore of antimony. And I hope that that and some of these other minerals have given you cause for thought, a few things to think of, a few things to go out there and still collect, but collect responsibly. And thank you very much, folks, and have a good day.